John Cole said of Sir Gavin Williamson's evidence about school closures that he thought that it was an extraordinary dereliction of duty. So he was referring again to the lack of planning for school closures. And he said it was perfectly clear to me, as someone who was running schools, that there was a high likelihood that schools would have to close. And we were planning for that, whilst, of course, doing everything we could to keep schools open. If it is right to characterise the lack of planning as a dereliction of duty, do you accept that that's a dereliction that's shared by the whole of government and not just the Department for Education?
Well, as I've tried to argue this morning, I think that the department, contrary perhaps to, it felt to me as though there had been abundant discussions about closing schools, and it felt to me, to the best of my recollection, as though the department was aware of this, and I assumed that they were planning for it. When I look at that document of March the 15th, it seems to me to suggest that a great deal of work and thought had gone into the key issues. So I'm not inclined to accept the idea that people fell down gravely in their duty. I think people were overwhelmed by the speed of events, and when the facts changed, they had to change policy, and I had to change policy.
So you don't accept that the evidence from the then Permanent Secretary that there was no contingency plan for school closures, or there wasn't planning that focused on the potential for mass school closures, you don't think that that's a dereliction of duty? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I can only repeat what I've just said. I understand. I know that Mr. Slater later resigned. I, though not over that matter as far as I can remember, I don't think, if you're the Perm Sec at the DFE, there's nothing to, there was certainly no, let me put it this way, there was absolutely nothing coming from central government to say you must not on any account prepare for school closures. On the contrary, anybody looking at what was happening would have assumed that school closures was something that had to be encompassed and prepared.
So, Mr. Johnson, your answer seems to amount to the fact that you were taking steps to try to keep schools open. Is it in fact the case that the government's primary concern at that time was to make provision of a minimal school service for the children of key workers with insufficient focus on the needs of vulnerable children?
I doubt very much that we ignored the interests of vulnerable children. I really do. But it's now so long ago that I'd have to go back over the papers and look and see what we put in place.
Nothing springs to mind.
Well, not at this stage, and not without, I'm afraid, without notice of your question. But I'd be happy to write to you.
Thank you, Ms. Beattie. Mr. Wagner, who's that way?
Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. I act for clinically vulnerable families. I want to ask you first about a message that you sent to Gavin Williamson on the 6th of July 2020. This is referred to at paragraph 48 of your statement. And you were asking about why school numbers, people returning to schools, seemed low. And he replied, noting that all schools were open and referring to the need to push on compulsory attendance and the message of normality. And you said, I encouraged him to continue the job. I just want to ask you about that message of normality. Would you agree, July 2020, this is months before the vaccine was widely available, was available at all? Do you agree?
Yes, that's right, yes. So I think we were starting to get inklings of it quite early on, yes.
Yeah. But there was no mass testing at that stage?
No.
No. So would you recognise that at that stage in July 2020, for many children and young people, things couldn't go back to normal yet because they still needed to either shield to protect themselves or a clinically vulnerable member of their family living in their home?
Sure.
You referred before to Mr. Jacobs about forward momentum, about trying to sort of build forward momentum. Do you think that in that race to return to normality in that summer of 2020, clinically vulnerable families may have been left behind?
I think, on the contrary, that getting back to school, had we been able to do it in a thoroughgoing way, would have been the best thing for all children, young people, clinically vulnerable or not. Because I think that it would have restored the environment that was best able to look after them, and that it had many advantages trying to keep the schools open.
But only if they could return safely. Is that fair?
Sure, but it was my view that schools should be made as safe as possible, and if they were safe, the kids should go back.
But in schools, it wasn't always possible to enforce social distancing or have, particularly in the older buildings, good ventilation or enough space, was it?
No, it was very tricky, but the schools did a remarkable job, and one of the reasons why we staggered the return in June of 2020 was precisely because we couldn't get everybody back in at once.
But the result of that, wasn't it, that it was sometimes not safe for clinically vulnerable children or children who might take COVID back to their clinically vulnerable family members to return?
Well, I think that there was always going to be an argument against reopening schools from that position, that you were going to create a situation in which vulnerable parents would be exposed to the virus picked up by kids in schools. That was the argument for closing schools, sure. But in the end, we had to decide whether that argument trumped the interests of the kids or not, and whether we could nonetheless get the R down below 1.
Just finally on that, do you? I'm not actually asking about the decision to reopen schools for everybody. I'm asking about for this specific subgroup, for clinically vulnerable children and children who lived in clinically vulnerable families. Do you understand why, at that point, many of those people will have felt it was safer to educate their children at home rather than send their children back to school?
I can see why they might have felt as they did, but clearly I thought it was best for everybody if they could get back to school, and I wanted schools to be as safe as possible.
Maccabi Tel Aviv's racist fan hooliganism cannot be separated from Israeli militarism. Many of these fans are active or former soldiers who have taken part in Israel's genocide in Gaza. They should be investigated for war crimes the moment they set foot onto British soil, not welcomed into our stadiums. And let's be clear, this Labour government is no innocent bystander. It has armed Israel's genocide, it has provided diplomatic cover, and it has shamefully denied that genocide is even taking place. So I ask the Minister, is there anything this Labour government won't do to defend the genocidal apartheid state of Israel?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I like the Honourable Lady, but I have to say that she is doing the people of Birmingham no favours with that sort of rhetoric. You know, when it comes to the conflation that she makes between all of the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters and the actions of the Israeli government, that is precisely what the honourable gentleman was talking about blaming, in many cases, British citizens who happen to support Maccabi Tel Aviv for actions that are taking place in the Middle East. Conflating being Jewish and Israeli, I have to say, I'm afraid, is in itself anti-Semitism.
Mr. Starmer, is it an appropriate point of order? Zara Sultana, point of order.
On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, in my question to the Secretary of State, I clearly stated that Maccabi Tel Aviv football team is inextricably linked to the Israeli state, which is an apartheid state. The boycott of apartheid regimes, such as apartheid South Africa, is a legitimate political stance. To label such a position as anti-Semitic, as the Secretary of State did, is entirely false and dangerous. And the way the Secretary of State has referred to me and my colleagues is also laced with Islamophobia.
Order, Ms Sultana. I do not have to repeat myself more than once. This is a continuation of the debate. The statement, the UQ, forgive me, has concluded.
Turning to the economy now, Mr. Speaker, I know members opposite are relieved. They are finally allowed to say the Conservatives' Brexit deal is a disaster. Yeah. But, Mr. Speaker, that can't just be a political ruse to attack the honourable member for Clacton, however much he deserves it. Or even worse, Mr. Speaker, or even worse, Mr. Speaker, given we still have the highest inflation in the G7, it mustn't be a smokescreen to raise taxes on ordinary people. Mr. Speaker, it must be a call to action. So will the Prime Minister act now to repair the Brexit damage by negotiating a new UK-EU customs union to boost Britain's trade and grow our economy?
No, I don't think that's the way forward. What we've done is to have a much closer relationship with the EU, recognising the damage done by the flawed Brexit deal that the party opposite negotiated.